So hello class, this is a bit of an off-the-cuff video, kind of raw. I don't have my recording apparatus since I am at a conference. I'm here at an exercise science and sports medicine conference in LA. Let me find my way outside and show you where I am. Let's see if that comes through. There we are. The Marriott Convention Center in LA, Burbank there. So gonna come out into the sun here so I can talk a little bit. Listen to some really great content, and this is really more for my physiology class than my anatomy class, but that is the fun about learning anatomy and then applying it in physiology. I took some notes on the convention center paper, and I wanted to just rehash that with you kind of real time here. Okay, so that didn't work. It was too loud outside, it was bright and windy, so I came back into the hotel room. These are the cards that I used to take notes during the lecture, and I want to review that with you here so it feels like you're sitting right next to me in the conference. So this is going to be quite a raw video, no fancy markers or whiteboard, just a pen and paper. But I love these real-time demonstrations of science and physiology, and hopefully it makes it feel like we're sitting together in the lecture hall, experiencing and learning together. So here we go. So first, let's get a few basics out of the way here. You've probably seen this before. If your intensity or your workload is along the x-axis and lactate is along the y-axis, as you exercise, lactate remains at a steady state, but then at some point it deflects off of that baseline. That's often called lactate threshold 1. And then there's usually a second deflection higher up, breaking off that baseline. That is called lactate threshold number 2. These are commonly referred to as, your baseline is 1.0, so when it first breaks off the baseline, that is at 1.0. This is somewhat arbitrary. People use different amounts in the literature from 2.0 to 2.5 to 4.0. Next, we can certainly draw a correlate to that with ventilation right here on the y-axis and oxygen consumption on the x. Same thing happens here. If you have lactate here and here, you have ventilation, but now ventilation, as you exercise, it steadily goes up, but then you get that same break there and then a same break there. Instead of lactate threshold 1 and 2, we now have ventilatory threshold 1, or sometimes called the gas exchange threshold. And then here we have ventilatory threshold 2, sometimes called the respiratory compensation point, and some people maximal lactate steady state. These are very interchangeable terms here. They all mean a slightly different thing, but they're all generally occurring at the second threshold. Now this is where things get fun. I've talked about this in a prior video that I'll probably put right up here. You can draw out all-out maximal exercise bouts with time on the x-axis and the power. If it's cycling, it's often measured in watts. If it's running, it's measured in speed. So for example, if you're only going to run for a short time, you're going to be able to run at a much higher speed or at a much higher power. And then of course, if you're exercising, so let's say this is like 1 minute, 60 seconds, and then this is 20 minutes out here, you're of course going to exercise at a lower speed. Since you have to maintain that speed all out for 20 minutes, your speed or power is going to be lower than here. But if you plot all these out, going out 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 12 minutes, the curve really drops, and then as you keep going, it stabilizes. Then if you go out, for example, to 60 minutes, it'll really level out, and then you'll be able to create a critical speed or critical power that in theory, if you continue to pan that out, you could go for 2 to 4 hours at this critical speed and never go anaerobic. So this is called critical speed or critical power. And if you plot out this graph right here and draw this out, you can actually measure an area under the curve. This area represents your anaerobic capacity. This is, so to speak, your finite reserve, your battery, often called W prime for watts in terms of cycling, or D prime distance, the extra distance you can run tapping into your anaerobic reserve. So this has quite literally been likened to a battery. That's a horrible drawing of a battery, sorry, but that is your spare, that's your backup. If you run at a higher speed or higher pace going above this critical speed, you have a finite reserve that you can tap into. That's if you're running and suddenly there's a hill and you have to power through that, you can dip into your battery, but it is finite. The neat thing, and this is how math is so cool, if you go at a lower speed than here, for example, here compared to here, you can go for a longer amount of time or a longer amount of distance, and the area under the curve does remain the same. So you can kind of pick your poison here. If you're going above your critical speed, if you only go a little bit above your critical speed, you can go for longer. If you go way above your critical speed, you can only go for shorter before you just kind of, well, crash and burn. Puke in the bushes, as they say. Your race is over if you drain your battery. That's why it is so important to stay under your critical speed. This critical speed or critical power, fortunately, correlates pretty well to your lactate threshold 2. And if we know that there's a lactate threshold 2, of course, the lactate threshold 1 is going to be a little bit lower than that right there. So when people talk about training at your lactate threshold, they usually mean the lactate threshold 1, that first one there. When they talk about training at your critical power, you're really tapping right up against your anaerobic capacity here, and you're maxing out your aerobic capacity. Also, neatly, these levels very nicely correlate into, and I'm going to draw it right here, training zones. So if we have this right here, and we have here being your critical power, here being your lactate threshold, this is your moderate domain, right? You are using oxygen, you are using fat for your energy, and you are training type 1 fibers. If you go above your lactate threshold, this is considered the heavy domain. You are still using oxygen, you are maximizing your oxygen, your aerobic system. Now you are starting to dip into glycogen, and now you are starting to get into those 2A fibers in terms of your muscle fiber capacity. Once you go beyond that and you start dipping into your battery, you go above your critical speed or critical power. This now is going to be the severe, and this is your anaerobic area. Gotta remember how to spell anaerobic. This is the fun of making a raw video. CO2 goes up, H plus goes up, lactate goes up, and if you keep going, you are eventually going to hit your VO2 max, and that is going to be, well, basically lining up right here. If you keep exercising, eventually you're going to hit your VO2 max, and then you're going to crash and burn. In theory, you could train above your VO2 max, but only for short times, not for 4 or 5 minutes, which would be a traditional VO2 max. This would be the absolute extreme, and this is really neuromuscular. This is pure anaerobic. You don't even really need oxygen. These are the people that do like a 25 meters in the pool and just stay underwater the whole time. They don't even come up for air because it is all anaerobic. In the extreme domain, you just can't do that for very long. That, if you're running, you're really typing into those type 2B fibers, or cycling. That is that absolute sprint up the hill, very short distance. So that is the extreme. And over here we can add in, if you train at your lower level of the lactate threshold, in theory you can do that, well, I guess, up to 2 to 4 hours or your marathon pace. If you are bumping right up against that anaerobic threshold, your critical power, that is really in the lines of 20 to 40 minutes for most regular folks like myself. If you are a super trained athlete, in theory you can do that for about an hour, 45 to 65 minutes at your critical power, but you've got to be really well trained and highly motivated. Most of us kind of tap out at about 30 minutes for critical power. So now that we've set the stage, I can tap into what I learned in the lecture and conference today. I started taking notes on that side. Sorry about that. The reliability of these measurements. Turns out that lactate threshold 1 is okay. You can fairly reliably measure that deflection above 1.0. Lactate 2, no, because it's very arbitrary which research study and which number you're using. Where do you measure that second deflection? It is really hard. So unfortunately, that is not very reliable. Respiratory compensation point, or the ventilatory equivalent to that, yeah, you can do a pretty good job of demarcating the heavy to severe domain that we just drew out over here. So once we cross that line and start tapping into anaerobic, yes, we can fairly reliably measure that. The MLSS that we talked about up here, we'd have to do that for 30 minutes. And yes, that turns out to be an okay, reliable measure, but you have to do that in multiple visits, because each time you do one of these 30-minute tests, you're going to get a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit of variability in the numbers. You have to do it multiple times, so it is really hard. Also, it actually underestimates your heavy to severe domain because you never really get there. If you're exercising for 30 minutes straight and you never really can tap into that anaerobic area, you can kind of miss that. You get a little bit of an underestimation. So it's not actually the best marker. So what is the gold standard? Well, it's measuring that critical power plus that W prime that we were talking about here and here. And what is that test? Well, the good news is it is one single test called the 3-minute all-out test. So that was a neat one. They were demonstrating that in the conference. It looks so miserable to do, and it's exactly what you think it is. You go for 3 minutes, absolutely all out. And when you plot that out, every single one, even the top athletes, they start out, they go a little too fast, and then they kind of come down to a normal state, and then for these 3 minutes is this area right here that you're measuring your critical power. And it is actually very accurate, reproducible, and reliable. So I thought that was cool. You may want to try the 3-minute test at home. Again, this is not medical advice. Please see your medical provider if you're having any cardiac or other issues before you go 3 minutes all out. Now, what was I drawing here and here? It was really cool. Bring this to the side. Let's get some new graphs here. So, here we go. Same thing as before. Our power curve. Now, let's say our critical speed in an athlete is someone who can run at like 4 meters per second, pretty much hammering down the track there. And now, let's say if we plot out different times, so let's say you run as hard as you can for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 12 minutes, 20 minutes, and you plot out your distances over here across time there, you could run in theory at, well, 5.0 meters per second, but you're not going to make it very far. At some point, you are going to crash and burn. I don't know, for example, like 3 minutes, 180 seconds right there. If you go a little bit slower, you can make it a little farther. Let's say that's 300 seconds there. And this might be, for example, 4.3, a little bit above your critical speed. You can go a little farther. You can actually plot that out and predict basically your battery. You can equate that into, well, you can go an extra 180 meters on the track, for example, or an extra 180 seconds or something like that. And you can equate your battery to a distance or to a time and predict how far that athlete can go above their critical speed. So, if they are racing a certain distance and they race at their critical speed as much as they can until the very end, which is called the kick, at that last part you can in theory plot out how far back they can start their kick and just hammer it and tap into their battery. So at the moment they cross that finish line, their battery is completely drained and they maxed out their race, which is pretty darn cool. It's amazing how well this stuff actually works in real life. Furthermore, it gets even cooler. Let's say we have one athlete. I'm going to start drawing it here. We're going to call this athlete A. Now you have another athlete who has a superior battery, right? For a given time, as they have to run as hard as they can go at a farther distance here. They have a higher overall battery, but when you plot out their curves, they end up like this. Right? So here's athlete B. So what does this mean in racing and coaching? Well, if you have athlete B, we'll put it here, they are the athlete with the higher kick. These are the ones that you dread when you're racing and you're in the race pack and they're all going and going and going. The guy that's in the back that's going to go right past you, which happened to me. I did cross country in 9th and 10th. I did high school. I did track and field in 11th and 12th grade. There were athletes that went right past me at the end, and I didn't win the race because they had a higher kick. That's what's represented by this power. This is their battery, a lot higher. However, athlete A has the better or higher critical speed. Right? So if the pack is slower, right, if the pacers can maintain a higher or slower speed, that's going to change things. So for athlete A, they would want to go out a lot faster and keep the race pack going at a much higher critical speed for most of the race because they can maintain that. And because athlete A, they're staying under their critical speed at this race pace. Athlete B, unfortunately, this is athlete B's, right, critical speed or critical power.
they have to go above that. They are already draining their battery right here, and you can beat the athlete with the higher kick by racing at your superior critical speed and have him drain his battery, and then he crashes and burns and never gets to use his kick because you drained his battery. I thought that was so cool, and it was such a fun demonstration of just pure math, science, and physiology that I found that just fascinating. So one fun way to equate this is the old story of the tortoise and the hare, right? The hare, the rabbit with the higher speed can go really quickly, but then has to slow down and then go quick and slow down. That's the superior battery. Whereas the tortoise with the better overall critical speed can just keep going at a steady pace and beat that hare, since they are making the hare drain their battery.
And to wrap this up, just wanted to include a couple of these here. This is the lecturer, Dr. Pettit. He was here last year. He came back again this year because he just has a good way of presenting the data. This is the 3-minute all-out test using scatter plots to teach critical power. And some of this data has actually been out way back in 1999. I just loved this. I wish I knew this when I was younger, right? Your metabolic limit on how to make up for lost time, right? If someone beats you, even though you got a great kick, you might have burned your battery and you'll never be able to catch them if the lead pack went out too fast. I did not know this. I did not even know what a battery meant, your physiologic battery, when I was in high school. I would have loved to know that, okay, when there's 200 meters to go in the race, that's when I should start my kick and I'll have the best chance of beating other people. Or maybe I don't have a good battery. I probably didn't. Maybe I should have worked on raising my critical speed. The really cool thing is now the really cool thing is with this data, we can go back in time and check other runners' performances and maybe try to figure out why a runner didn't end up performing the way, it was thought that they would. The famous example is Steve Prefontaine. Incredible story. Read the book. It's really amazing. Pre was incredible. He really hated runners that sat back and then just kicked at the end. So he usually set really fast paces trying to burn off the sprinters. Didn't really know the concept of the battery back then, but they knew that there was something to this. But unfortunately, in the 1972 Olympics, he actually stayed back with the pack. It was a slow pace in the 5K. He took the lead with about 4 laps to go, 1 whole mile to go. That's when he picked up the pace. That's unfortunately when he started to drain his battery, and all the way, that was a really strong push, but all the way up to the last 200 or 100 meters in a 5,000 meter race, that's when his battery was gassed and other runners passed him, and he ended up finishing 4th. He just missed out on a medal. I thought, that would be such a disappointing, sad loss, but instead it was seen as a great representation, a courageous, authentic display of, classic Pre. He said famously, "I want to go out at world record pace," which he didn't really in the start of the race, but then ended up going a little too hard in the middle of the race. But it ended up earning him even more popularity and really kind of solidified his legacy in the running world. Really cool story. Anyway, I got to get back to the conference. And furthermore, coaches who are savvy on this can now identify the runners that have the great kick and identify runners that are the leaders of the pack and be able to train them, pick their race duration for them to maximize their chances of success. And lastly, coaches can train you at the part that you're bad at. So if you are a runner that leads the pack but don't have a good kick, they'll intentionally hold you back and then force you to do basically kick interval workouts, which are really hard because you're not good at it. And same thing for the runners that have the great kick but they're not really good at leading the pack. They'll push them to lead the pack and exhaust them, and basically they're training you at the part that you suck at in running, and it's really hard. All the athletes hate it. So I thought that was fascinating, a direct application of your physiology for practical aspects in sports performance. I better get back into the conference here because the next session is going to start. I just wanted to share that with you, and have a good one.